Thank you very much, and I want to thank you all today as well for coming. I think it's important that we highlight our issues, and I know we've spoken there about recruitment and retention, and I'm CHO5 as I said, Carlow Kilkenny area, and I do understand that the CDNT in Carlow is very understaffed. I would think one of the worst in the country, but I do understand too we have to be very mindful of the staff that are there, because there is such a thing as burnout, and I do understand that too, because I know they are under fierce pressure, but I can only just say, and hand on heart, the amount of families that this has affected has been unreal, and the amount of families coming to me so upset. Now when I say upset, I really mean upset in the sense that I have people crying. That's how bad it's gone. And today I met with CNO in Carlow, and the reason I met with CNO is because of the ASD classes that the government are looking at, which is good that they're going to make sure that schools now are able to, if they have the capacity or if they have the room to build them, that we get the ASD classes. But my issue is, and I would have said this today, there is children in the system that are waiting to be assessed, and they are not assessed. So my fear is now that we are now going to be coming up into September into a new school year, and there will be children that will be waiting on a waiting list to be assessed, and they won't be assessed. And that to me is a huge issue, because, and we spoke about, the importance of, I suppose, everybody working together, whether it's CNO, whether it's the HSE, whether it's all the, I suppose, the education side, if it's, whether it's through whatever bills. But if early intervention isn't done, we're going to end up having a huge long-term problem. And that is, I think, what's happening now at the moment. And I'm really now feeling that I have never seen as many families come into my clinic as I have seen in the last 2 years that are waiting, their children are waiting for assessments. And as I said, there's not a door that I'm not knocking between CHO5, between yourselves, going to anyone I can that can do the work. But I suppose, look, my first question would have to be, and Bernard, I welcome your opening report. You're saying engagement with the wider community and voluntary sector to identify a range of supports and services that can be provided to children and families while they await the CDNT services. What supports and services are you given? And I mean this very nicely now, because people are not getting phone calls back. They're ringing me, they're ringing the HSE. Maybe that would be the first question. The second question that I would like to ask you is the strong oversight and support by the CEO and the board of the HSE. 69 of 91 family forums and five of the 9 family representative groups are now up and running and have nominated their 2 family reps for CHO CDNT governance group, and we will run an independent review on the experience of this. You might explain that to me, because there's a little bit confusion about that, and I'll explain that to you in a second. The other question I wanted to ask is, and this is another concern for me, while there are challenges, and you've said that, so there's 46,000 children are on the CDNT caseload, with approximately 16,000 currently receiving a service from the CDNTs every month, in addition, based on each individual team, and I understand that. So you have 46,000 approximately children caseloads on the system, and 16,000 are currently receiving a service. You might just break that down for me, because I'm a little bit confused about that as well. The other question I want to ask you about, and as we all know, and I know myself, I work very closely with Minister Anne Rabbitte. How have you seen the transfer of the functions, and what way has it affected the services, and what has been done through Minister Anne Rabbitte? Look, I know how passionate she is, but I just want to know what the gain is there, and what maybe as part of your roadmap going forward is that. Can you maybe come back to me on that? What do the HSE believe on the key supports that parents need with a child with a complex or non-complex disability? So how are the HSE rolling out those supports? And that's an issue, and the reason I'm asking you that is, while we have complex or non-complex disabilities, I just kind of need to know. I've some families that I'm working with. How are the ISL supports being rolled out in the CDNTs to support cases of services for deaf children? I know that's part of something that you're working on. And the HSE is establishing sharing experience and expertise in disability centres as virtual interconnected national network of practices in the motor management and feeding, eating, drinking and swallowing. Do parents have access to this? I have one or two issues that I want to maybe be looked at. But look, I can only just say that Carlow CDNT, we need more staffing. I'm not here to criticise any staff member because I know everyone is burnt out. I work very closely with the HSE. I work very closely with CNO in regards to ASD classes and, someone that might need a care or whatever. So I am very mindful of this, but I believe we're starting to hit a crisis here now. And this is just my own opinion, but I believe if we don't actually start providing services quicker, the children are losing out, the families are at breaking point, and I just believe we need to do something urgently. I remember at one stage, I believe it was muted, that with the waiting list for the CDNT for the different services, that there might be a scope at looking at private occupational therapists, and the HSE would look at refunding them then. I have 2 cases at the moment and their children really need to be done urgently. I actually went and priced a private occupational therapist myself for them. You're looking between 1,200 to 1,600 now to get a private occupational therapist for a child. And look, families don't have it. There's families out there, they just don't have it. So, all I can say is, look, what can we do in the interim to help these children and their families that are really at breaking point? Again, look, I welcome you here today. I know that you are here to try and solve the problems that are there. I'm not saying you're not, and I welcome that, and I'm glad you're coming in so often, but I'm just wondering, how can we find some sort of a solution here? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bernard.
And I'll ask colleagues to help with some of the answers, if that's okay. So maybe if I could start with the transfer of functions, because I think it does create a context for the work that we're doing, which is different to how things were before the transfer. Yeah. We now have a department that we're engaging with who have a very specific focus and a commitment in relation to disability services. And in those engagements, and they're engaging with all levels of the HSE, when they're doing that, while they're mindful of the other pressures, like the emergency department issues and the hospital challenges and so on, they're very focused on, and what about disability services? And it's not, whereas I think when we were in the Department of Health, and no disrespect to the Department of Health, disability was one part of a wider issue, and I suppose the pressures in acute services often trumped the focus maybe on disability, and maybe other areas. So I think it certainly has brought a focus. So when we look at the outcome of the last budgetary process, I think it would be fair to say that disability services probably got more money, relatively speaking, than the rest of the HSE, and has probably benefited because of the single focus. And I think in terms of the engagement with other departments to try and problem solve, I think there's a lot of potential there. I think it's also fair to say this month, I think just this week, is the first anniversary of the transfer of functions. Yep. A lot of that first year, to be fair to the department, has been learning about it and kind of gathering knowledge, building their own team, and they've made a lot of progress on that. And I think that we will see a lot of further drive over the coming months and years that may not have happened if they had remained in the Department of Health. So I think it represents huge potential, and that will be realised. I think in terms of your observation about the state of play, like, we use the word crisis ourselves and have done for some time. Like, I think any circumstance, we collectively would think that any circumstance where we're not able to meet the needs of children represents a crisis and is something that warrants serious focus, and that's why I think the roadmap serves a good framework for how we deal with things. But we're also dealing with complex issues that there isn't one solution to. So if you take the recruitment issue, we have to have a pipeline of people to be able to recruit. We then have to have working conditions that attract people. We have, thankfully the issue around Section 39 pay is beginning to be addressed. We've talked about that in many of these meetings in the past. Some of the accommodation issues that we have across the services need to be addressed. So there isn't any one thing that fixes it, but you need to be able to work on a few, and I think the roadmap sets out the framework by which many of those components are addressed. In relation to the grant scheme, the range of things that are there are alternative respite options, equine therapy. There's a whole mix of things in there. I'll be able to give more detail to you once I'm in a position to announce it. They're not an alternative to the therapy that a child might need.
And can I just ask you one thing, Bernard? As I said, families have gone to get privately assessed, and I know within the cost factor of whether it's 1,200 or 16, some of them are 2 assessments, so there could be 2 assessments within that. Is there scope for your department to give family some support? I know people have gone to social welfare under the hardship clause to look for it. So to me, if there was the bit of funding there for the 2, whatever, like it depends, some kids need 2 maybe assessments, others need 3 or whatever. So I'm just wondering, is there anything there you could do in the support?
Yeah, so at the moment there isn't, because of the way the way the HSE is funded and the kind of the rules that apply to us. I know it's something that Minister Rabbitte has indicated that she was interested in exploring, and we will need some direction from the department if that were to happen. It does come with other consequences, like everything. So one, there's some capacity in the private sector, but it's very limited. If you fund directly to families for them to buy the service themselves, we will further create a private sector and at the risk to public services. If I was a family member, I wouldn't care where the service was coming from if I could access it. So I understand why families will say, well, look, I'm interested in my child and I'll take the support where I can get it. But I think if there is something where the minister and the department want something that's directed towards families in the way that you're describing, we still have to keep our focus, I think, on building public services, so that we're not in that position, I think, into the future.
Just timing is of the utmost.
Absolutely.
The vote has been called, right?
Oh, sorry.